The Prime Minister on indulgence.
Mr Speaker, I inform the House that the Minister for Defence Industry will be absent for question time today and for the remainder of the week as she is in London leading the Australian delegation of the Defence and Security Equipment International Conference, and the Minister for Home Affairs will answer questions on her behalf.
I thank the Prime Minister. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister. If the economy is going as well as he claims, why do business confidence and conditions numbers get worse again today, and why are they well below the long-term average?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm pleased to know that the confidence figures remain on the positive side of the ledger, and they remain on the positive side of the ledger despite
Members on both sides.
Very complex and difficult challenges that the Australian economy faces, Mr Speaker. Now, unlike the Leader of the Opposition or the Labor Party, who have taken to talk down the economy, Mr Speaker, what we can see on this side of the House is the opportunity in the Australian economy and the way forward for the Australian economy. And the way you take the Australian economy forward is you don't hold it down with higher taxes, Mr Speaker, that crush the spirit of Australians, because the Labor Party still holds on to $387 billion of taxes they want to still put on the Australian economy. Now, Mr Speaker, I can hear the jeers of those opposite who are saying that's not the case. Well, Mr Speaker, when are they going to let the Australian people in on the secret about what their view is on taxes, Mr Speaker?
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
I remind the Prime Minister that by definition that implies he's the government leader, and he needs to be relevant. It asked about government policy, nothing to do with Labor. I know he's obsessed, but it's about the economy, business confidence and what the government's doing about it.
The Prime Minister has the call. Listen carefully. The question was, members on my left, Treasurer, those members that have a tendency to interject when I'm seeking to rule on a subject are not helping anybody. Question asked about the economy and about specific statistics. I'm listening to the Prime Minister. He's entitled to compare and contrast if he relates the material to his answer, but it certainly didn't ask about opposition policy.
That's true, Mr Speaker. I was asked about confidence, and I answered the question about confidence, Mr Speaker. And at the last election, the Australian people expressed confidence in the economic plan that we took to the election, an economic plan that was about lowering taxes, that was about $100 billion in infrastructure investment, that was about expanding our export opportunities, that was about dealing with deregulation in the economy. And since the election, we have announced that we are going to further deregulate measures that stymie investment, that we are working through the challenges that are faced in the industrial relations area. We took to the election our plan to keep the Australian Building and Construction Commission. Today, Master Builders Australia are in the building. They're here at the moment, Mr Speaker, and the Labor Party wanted to take away the rule of law in the building and construction industry, which would have taken people's jobs and rewarded the union thugs like John Setka, who continues to stage a sit-in in the Victorian Labor Party, Mr Speaker. So whether it's the Setka sit-in in Victoria, the walkout of WA factions in Western Australia, the corruption we're seeing in the New South Wales Labor Party, the Leader of the Opposition is presiding over a party that is chaos and confusion and even corruption, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition seeking to table a document. The member for Sydney is not helping the Leader of the Opposition. Seeking to table a document.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I am indeed. The NAB Monthly Business Survey, August 2019, headed below average confidence and conditions.
Is leave granted? Leave is not granted. The member for Barara has the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I note that today is World Suicide Prevention Day. Will the Prime Minister please update the House about how the Morrison government is investing in improving the mental health of Australians and suicide prevention?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Barara for his question, and together with the member for Eden Monaro for the work they do as part of the Parliamentary Friends of Suicide Prevention, and I thank the member for Barara for his incredible strength and leadership on this issue in this place. Speaking at the breakfast this morning, I had the sad duty to inform those who were there of a letter I'd recently received from a mum in Western Sydney. I had attended a wedding with Jenny of a friend, and at that wedding we'd had a photo together with her and her husband and her 3 children. And at the front of that photo was this bright, beaming young boy, Luke, who has been yet another young Australian who's taken his own life in the last 12 months. This is a curse on our country. It's a curse that together, all of us in this place, I think are absolutely determined to break. I want to thank all of those in this House for the support they give to the very worthy goal we have of a Towards Zero initiative on youth suicide and on suicide more generally. More than 3,000 Australians took their lives in 2017. We've invested some $503 million in the Youth Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan. That is the largest suicide prevention plan that any government has ever put into practice. $375 million to expand and improve frontline headspace services, 20 new headspace sites for rural and regional Australia, new mental health telehealth services funded through the Medicare benefit schedule, $12 million to specifically support parents and their children, including helping parents recognise when their children are struggling, the funding of new mental health support services through our Community Health and Hospitals program, strengthening Indigenous youth suicide prevention efforts, backed with some $19.6 million to prevent Indigenous youth suicide, particularly in the Kimberley, and $22.5 million in youth and Indigenous health research projects as part of the Million Minds mission. These projects also include almost $3 million in funding for a wonderful organisation called Batir, which the member for Reid and I and the Health Minister had the privilege to go and see their work in action. Absolutely extraordinary stuff. Extraordinary stuff. We're at Burwood's Girls High School together as part of that workshop. They've reached 171,000 young people. We've appointed Christine Morgan as the National Suicide Prevention Advisor, and she's got a huge job to do, and she's going to need all of our support to do it as she works right across government and working with state and territory leaders and their administrations. But most importantly, on World Suicide Prevention Day, we must tell Australians that if you are feeling the strain, if you're feeling the stress, if you're battling with mental illness, if you think there are things that you can't overcome, you are not alone. There is an Australian who is there to help you, and an Australian who will reach out to you and seek to support you. And of course, I employ anyone in that circumstance experiencing that distress to get in contact with Lifeline 131114 and other frontline service providers, and I thank all of them for the amazing work they do to help their fellow Australians.
And the Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
Speaker, briefly on indulgence, I associate Labor with all of the comments of the Prime Minister on this very important day, and I say that we support all of the government's initiatives in this regard and stand ready to support in a bipartisan way any further initiatives that are needed to rid this scourge from our society.
The member for Rankin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. In the face of skyrocketing cost of living pressures on Australian households, can the Treasurer confirm that this government has presided over the worst wages growth on record?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Rankin for his question. I can confirm to the House that the Wages Price Index, which is the euphemism for wages growth, grew by 2.3% for the year. Now, this was just behind our budget forecast of 2.5%. But importantly, the wages bill for the economy, was 4.5% for 2018-19, which was above our budget forecast of 4.25%. Now, Mr Speaker, the member for Rankin should be aware that wages growth fell by 1.6% under Labor, Mr Speaker, and the largest downgrades to wages growth occurred on Labor's watch, Mr Speaker. And if there was anything that was going to cost jobs, And if there was
Rankin.
anything that was going to see wages fall, that was $387 billion of higher taxes, which the member for Rankin, who we know likes to tax a lot, Mr Speaker, we know likes to tax a lot. It is still their policy. They like to spend a lot, as the Prime Minister reminds the House as well. The Labor Party would have seen wages fall, jobs lost, whereas under the coalition, wages continue to grow and more than 1.4 million new jobs have been created.
The call alternates. That's been doing it for a long time. Call the member for Mallee.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Minister update the House on the impact of the drought across regional Australia and how the Morrison-McCormack government is assisting those people and communities affected?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Mallee for her question, Mr Speaker, and point out that I know that there are significant areas in her electorate affected by this crippling and prolonged drought, especially the Millewa, Mr Speaker, and right across this nation. We heard the member for Monash talking in heartfelt terms in his 90-second statement about how the drought is affecting his Victorian electorate. I know the member for Grey, Mr Speaker, this morning talked passionately about how his electorate was suffering. I know whether it's the Gippsland, Mr Speaker, they've had a few showers in Gippsland, but they're still doing it tough. Indeed, Farrer, my own electorate, Parks, the member for Parks, Mr Speaker, last Thursday drove about 1,050 kilometres between Broken Hill and Moree and encountered just 3 mobs of sheep along the way. Mr Speaker, many of the farmers have destocked in his electorate, as they have in the member for New England's electorate. I know the member for Maranoa, who in fact is now a dedicated Cabinet Minister for drought, but I know how hard the communities and the farmers are affected in Maranoa. Mr Speaker, they're hurting. They're hurting emotionally. They're hurting financially. After generations of hard work for the land and livestock, imagine just seeing all that disintegrate before your very eyes. It's not just a matter of a couple of rough seasons or about the price of head for sheep or cattle. It's about people's homes, their livelihoods, their history on the land, Mr Speaker. We're making sure, the government's making sure, that our farmers and our small business owners can reach out for help when they need it. And I commend the Minister for Drought, the member for Maranoa, Mr Speaker, for the work that he has done, putting rural financial counsellors, experts around the kitchen table, talking to farmers and their families about how we as a government, we as a parliament indeed, can help. And I know the member for Eden Monaro, his electorate is hurting too. There are so many more electorates, Mr Speaker, but over the past year this service has assisted more than 6,600 people. And I know we stand ready, Minister, to do even more. We know when our farmers suffer, so too does our nation. The federal government is providing $1 million to 110 councils, including the Bull Oak Shire and the member for Mallee's electorate, Mr Speaker. We can, we will and we must do more for these drought-affected communities, Mr Speaker. The Drought Communities program, just one step along the way, Mr Speaker, is about investing in local infrastructure projects, making sure that employment stays within communities, making sure that money stays within the towns and making sure that the people at least have a positive outlook. We will do more, Mr Speaker. We've put in place the $5 billion Future Drought Fund. It's a good initiative, Mr Speaker, and we'll stand by these communities as they continue to suffer from the effects of the drought.
The member for Barton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Only months ago, the government promised that 1 million pensioners will get an $800 bonus from changes to deeming rates. Can you confirm that only 191 pensioner couples will receive $800? How can the Prime Minister explain this broken promise?
I'd click this one.
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you. I thank the member for Barton for her question. I can confirm that under these new deeming rates, affected pensioners will receive up to $40.50 extra a fortnight for couples, which is above $1,000, and up to $31 extra a fortnight for singles. Now, that is $804, Mr Speaker. That is $804. On average, a couple receiving the age pension can expect to receive $314 a year extra, and a single can expect $250 extra. Now, Mr Speaker, the cost of these changes to the deeming rates was $600 million to the budget, and it will benefit around 1 million people. But as you know, there are two deeming rates. There's a lower deeming rate and an upper deeming rate, and the member opposite should acquaint herself with the facts.
The members on both sides, the member for Sydney, the member for Mayo has the call. Could the member for Mayo just start again? Her microphone wasn't on, so having difficulty hearing up here. The member for Mayo has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. In April this year, the government announced funding to equip every men's shed with a portable defibrillator. There are over 900 men's sheds in Australia, and more than a dozen are in my electorate, including the Yankalilla men's shed, who are anxiously awaiting the rollout. Minister, could you please provide the House an accurate timeline on when the government will make good on the promise to ensure every men's shed has this vital piece of life-saving equipment installed?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Mayo. All members of this House will be acquainted with the work of men's sheds around the country. They serve many purposes. One is they serve a community benefit in terms of supporting those who are less advantaged. Two, they provide a source of comfort and activity where many of the men who come along might otherwise be isolated. Three, of course, they serve a very important purpose in terms of mental health and isolation and providing that support for each other, mates supporting mates in a very positive Australian way, which has gone around the world. And I want to acknowledge a previous Prime Minister, Prime Minister Gillard, who was a strong supporter, as is the current Prime Minister, and people on all sides of this House. We recently announced $11 million for the Men's Shed program. That includes an expansion of men's sheds. It also includes additional support for existing men's sheds and $2 million for the men's sheds defibrillator program. My department is currently carrying out a survey of needs around the country. We expect that to be completed over the course of the coming months, and my request of them and my confident prediction to the House is that we will have these defibrillators rolling out early in the new year. I would like to pass on my thanks to those in the Yankalilla men's shed. I know Yankalilla, and it's a fine town, but please pass on our thanks to them and to indicate that we are looking to make sure that every men's shed in the country is equipped with a defibrillator.
The member for STURT.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer inform the House how the Morrison government's certain and stable approach to the economy is creating jobs for hard-working families across Australia, including in my electorate of STURT, and is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for STURT for his question. And he knows that more than 79,000 taxpayers in his electorate will get a tax cut as a result of the legislation that this side of the House supported, Mr Speaker. And around 30,000 will get the full $1,080 in the electorate of STURT, Mr Speaker. Now, we on this side of the House see it as our job to help create more jobs, Mr Speaker, and we have seen more than 1.4 million new jobs being created on our watch, Mr Speaker. We now have a record number of Australians in work, Mr Speaker. We have a participation rate which is at a record high. And, Mr Speaker, we have a gender pay gap which is at a record low, Mr Speaker, having closed by $1,100 since you were last in office, Mr
Treasurer will just pause. Treasurer will just pause for a second. Members on my left will cease shrieking, particularly the member for Rankin. I'm just going to remind him he has the matter of public importance this afternoon so far. Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Employment growth is 2.6% today, and when Labor was last in office, it was 0.7%, Mr Speaker, less than a third, Mr Speaker. Now, over the last 12 months, more than 320,000 new jobs have been created, 8 out of 10 of which have been full-time. And in the month of July, we saw more than 41,000 new jobs being created. And unemployment today is 5.2%. And when we came to government, it was 5.7%, Mr Speaker. But I'm asked, are there any alternative approaches? And we know that those opposite have $387 billion of higher taxes, which will cost jobs across the economy, Mr Speaker. All of this is from a party. All of this is from a party that Paul Keating says has lost the ability to speak to the aspirations of people and to fashion policies for their aspirations, Mr Speaker. Now, today when you open the paper on the front page, you see the Labor Party ripping themselves apart, Mr Speaker. You see the Labor Party ripping themselves apart. Now, you've got on one side of the fence, you've got Chairman Wayne and his acolyte, the member for Rankin, Mr Speaker, and on the other side, you've got the member for Grainler and his campaign director, the member for Hindmarsh, Mr Speaker. Now, who is going to win this tug of war over Labor's taxes, Mr Speaker? Well, I'll tell you who won't win. I tell you who won't win. That is the Australian people, Mr Speaker, because they know that Labor wants to tax a lot, Labor wants to spend a lot, Mr Speaker, and the Labor Party is always the party of higher taxes, and the coalition is always the party of more jobs and lower taxes.
The member for Griffith.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. I refer to the minister's previous answer in which he claimed he had declared his interest in Jamland according to the rules. How does the minister explain an FOI decision by his department on 23 August 2019 and the answer to a question on notice from his department also dated August 2019, which state it has no record of any declaration by the minister?
Yes, I'm just going to hear from the Leader of the House on this. The Leader of the House is entitled to raise a point of order. I say to the Leader of the Opposition, the Manager of Opposition business does so regularly without being admonished. I'm just sort of going to wait till you Well, I don't know who your conversation's with, but until it stops, I'm not going to hear from the Leader of the House.
I think it's with his conscience.
I think I better call the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, it's with respect to the well-known exception to the rule in 98C, obviously relating to statements made by ministers that may have occurred previously, which questions can be asked in relation to. But it appears that the question is in relation to an FOI statement, which is not a statement of the minister made previously and therefore would be out of order.
The member for Isaacs is interjecting regularly, is particularly loud. You're injuring my left ear, OK? I'd prefer you didn't interject, but if you have to, maybe the whip will assign you another seat where you're less provocative. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker. The question at the start refers to a specific statement that the minister has made to the House. The reference to the FOI points to that statement being untrue. And so it is completely appropriate that a minister is able to be asked. It's not like we've simply said refer to previous answers in the general. We've gone very specifically to a claim that he made that is contradicted by a decision of his department.
Can I hear the question again? Thank the member for Griffith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. I refer to the minister's previous answer in which he claimed he declared his interest in Jamland according to the rules. How does the minister explain an FOI decision by his department on 23 August 2019 and the answer to a question on notice from his department, also dated August 2019, which stated has no record of any declaration by the minister?
Just hear from the Leader of the House again.
Mr Speaker, the minister's previous statement was with respect to the standard disclosure that he, like all of us, is required to do as a member of parliament. At the very least, what the question does is contain an inference about a statement made by a department which, by the way, is not the minister's department, but with respect to a standard which all of us are required to submit to. And in that sense, the question is clearly out of order.
Manager of Opposition Business, just briefly, I think.
Yeah, with respect to the issue of the declaration, we're referring to a specific statement that the minister made in the House, not to the declaration separate to that. Yeah. With respect to the department, I'd simply draw the Leader of the House's attention to the fact that it is the minister's department that has made this decision.
I'll rule on this now so that we can. Whoever that was, you're not being helpful. I take the point the Leader of the House is making, but given the linkage to the minister's previous answer, I will allow the question, and obviously he can answer it in the way he sees fit, given what he said in his previous answer. The minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I've been clear that my indirect interest in the delegate farm is declared to the parliament in accordance with the rules. Now, I've always been clear that the discussions with the department were to focus on the technical aspects of the revised listing, and they did. And I advised the then Minister of the compliance matter and the need to avoid any discussion of the matter. Now, the department confirmed at a Senate hearing that this approach was completely appropriate. So let's be clear, I declared my interest, the department already knew of the relationship, and the meeting didn't discuss the compliance matter.
The member for Ryan actually has the call. Member for Ryan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government's stable and certain approach to industry is supporting jobs growth and business investment by backing manufacturing?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question, and I thank him for his very great interest in manufacturing businesses, particularly manufacturing businesses in his electorate of Ryan. And that was clearly on display last week when I joined the member in his electorate to announce the opening of the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund. Now, we visited an outstanding business in his electorate, Emercent. Now, it was formed in October of last year, following about 10 years' research with the CSIRO. And since that time, they have become world leaders in autonomous drone technology. Their workforce has tripled and they're exporting to around a dozen countries, and all of that has happened in less than 12 months. But importantly, they're currently going through a recruitment phase. They're looking to recruit more people, and they're certainly planning to recruit more people over the coming months and years as they expand. Now, Mr Speaker, the Coalition announced the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund during the election campaign, and now we are delivering that fund. This is a $160 million fund for manufacturers, small and medium enterprises. It comprises $50 million in funding support from the Commonwealth Government and $110 million from industry. So there's a co-commitment from the government and from the businesses themselves. Now, the fund is now open, so small and medium enterprises can now make application for grants of between $50,000 and $1 million to look at upgrading the technology that they are currently using to make sure that they become more productive, that they are able to grow their businesses and they can look to employ more people. It's important to us that we grow manufacturing businesses here in Australia. And let me say, Mr Speaker, that under the Morrison government, with the certainty and the stability that we offer, Australia will always be a manufacturing nation. We want to help make sure that Australian manufacturing industry continues to be world-class. We want to make sure that our manufacturing businesses are competing on value rather than on cost. We know that Australian goods are very highly regarded overseas. They're high quality. And we want to make sure that we are supporting our manufacturing businesses to grow and to develop. Mr Speaker, the Coalition Government is committed to working with manufacturing businesses to grow the economy, to improve productivity and to create more jobs.
The member for Griffith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. Does the minister stand by his claim in the House that he intervened in the grasslands matter in the interests of his constituents?
The minister has the call.
Of course. Yes.
Yes, I always act in the interests of my constituents.
The member for Curtin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is providing stability and certainty by supporting small business and skills development so as to remove barriers to employment and help Australians into jobs?
The Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Curtin for her question and acknowledge her passion for all things education. 54 schools in her electorate, a major university, 40 vocational education providers and around 27,000 small businesses, and she's passionate about all of them. The Morrison government understands that Australians want the certainty and stability that a good job brings. And a stronger economy is the key to creating more jobs for Australians. And our economic strategy continues to see jobs growth in Australia. As at July 2019, almost 1.4 million more Australians are in jobs since the coalition government was elected in 2013. We continue to see record job growth. Total employment is at a record high, with over 12.9 million Australians employed. We have record full-time employment at nearly 8.85 million. Over 255,600 full-time jobs have been created in the past year. Now, Australians have the confidence to enter the jobs market because we are creating the certainty and stability to back small and family businesses so they can unlock their potential. Just one example of this, we've extended the instant asset write-off threshold from $25,000 to $30,000 and lifted the turnover rate to $50 million. Australia also has a world-class tertiary education system, but we are not resting on our laurels. We want to continue to make our skills sector more responsive, more flexible and more attractive to potential students of all walks of life. To achieve this, we are investing over $500 million in measures to increase apprenticeships, promote vocational training and fill skill shortages to ensure Australians have the real skills that they need for real careers. The Joyce Review, an incredibly important review. And why are we doing this? Because we want to provide industry with a pipeline of qualified workers needed to keep our economy strong, while targeting training in areas of skills demand. The government is working to ensure businesses and individuals have the skills that they need. And how are we able to do this? Because we are providing certainty and stability. We understand the certainty and stability leads to jobs growth, and jobs growth leads to national prosperity.
The minister's time has concluded. The member for Griffith.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. I refer the Minister to his previous answer. Can the Minister confirm he has been representing himself on the grasslands all along and told ABC Radio Illawarra on 26 July that one of the landholders is me and, quote, I make absolutely no apologies for standing up for farmers in my region. That includes me.
The Minister has the call. The Leader of the House.
It's true.
Members on both sides.
It's true. He lives in...
The members on my right. The Treasurer, the Deputy Prime Minister, your Leader of the House is seeking the call, if that's okay. The Leader of the House.
Yes, so with respect to 98C, again, it would
No,
need to...
just if members could cease interjecting. The members for Petrie, the Leader of the House.
So with respect to the exclusion of 98C, again, it would need to be relatable to that previous statement. The previous statement, as described in the question, was twofold. Firstly, that the minister lives in his electorate on a farm, and secondly, that he's representing people in his electorate affected by the issue, and those are two different things.
No, I'm going to allow the question. I think it's a straightforward question. The minister. Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, as it happens, I have a transcript of that interview with me. And at that interview, I'll read from the transcript. I'm quoting myself here. I make absolutely no apologies for standing up for farmers in my region. I make no apologies. If I'm not standing up for farmers in the federal parliament, then who is? I mean, that is what local members do. Now, Mr Speaker,
members on my left.
Mr Speaker, the point I was making was that me and my family are farmers in my electorate. We're farmers in my electorate, and it pains me to remind those opposite that this is a representative democracy. That's what it is. Standing up for your members, standing up for your constituents is what local members should do, even though most of us, with a few exceptions, live in our electorates, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, Labor is accusing me and my family of the heinous crime of being farmers in my electorate, while they turn a blind eye to the literal bags of cash being laundered through Sussex Street. What utter hypocrisy!
Members on both sides. The member for Gorton. The member for Lindsay has the call.
Thank you, Mr
Members
Speaker.
on both sides. The member for Lindsay. The Deputy Prime Minister. The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Families and Social Services. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's stable and certain approach to welfare is successfully removing barriers to employment and getting people off welfare and into a job?
The Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts.
Well, I do thank the member for Lindsay, who has a very strong commitment to helping Australians make the transition from welfare into work, including her constituents. And indeed, in the discharge of my former responsibilities, I was delighted to join the member on a visit to Lindsay to explore and deal with examples of exactly how we are working to assist people to make the transition from welfare to work through projects like Productivity Boot Camp, where I joined the member for the official opening of their Penrith trial site, and our government is funding this project with $2.24 million. 430 young people will be trained in skills in construction in an 8-week course. And that is a very good example of the focus that our government has on assisting people to make the transition from welfare to work. And we're doing that. We're delivering certainty and stability in our approach to helping Australians make the transition from welfare into work. People know what we stand for on this side of the House. We stand for the proposition that the best form of welfare is a job. But more than just standing for that proposition, we're acting to deliver it. We've created 1.4 million jobs since we came to government in 2013. Mr Speaker, the proportion of working-aged Australians on welfare is at its lowest level in 30 years at 14.3%. Now, by contrast, when we came to government in 2013, that ratio was at 16.5%. Labor's approach, Mr Speaker, it's always the same. They talk about how caring they are, but on their watch they simply stand by while more people end up on welfare. By contrast, we are taking practical steps to support Australians on welfare, to create jobs through our $100 billion of investment in infrastructure, through entering into free trade agreements, through lower taxes on business because the majority of jobs are private sector jobs. This is how we're creating jobs, and through innovative programs like Try, Test and Learn, the $96 million program under which the Productivity Bootcamp project in the members' electorate is funded. Our approach is certainty and stability when it comes to getting Australians from welfare into work.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy. Can the Minister confirm that so far he's told the House he was representing an unknown number of unnamed farmers inside and outside his electorate, someone who wrote a letter to someone else 3 years before the meeting, someone else who wrote a letter to another someone else 6 months after the meeting, and the mysterious bloke from Yass? Why won't the minister admit to the House what he told local radio, that he's actually been representing himself the entire time?
The Minister for Energy would just his room, his seat for a second. So to the Manager of Opposition Business, I'm not sure the question asked the minister to refer to his previous answers. No, not. Yes, no. I'd just like you to read the opening sentence again.
The opening sentence is: can the minister confirm that so far he has told the House that he was represented?
That's fine. The minister, the Leader of the House. Sure.
I think the difficulty with that is it then completely misrepresents previous answers that have been given by the minister.
Correct. And I say to the Leader of the House, whilst I appreciate the point he's been making, Speaker Andrew and other speakers have made the point that when these claims are made, it's a balancing act between whether you let them stand or let the minister actually deal with them in the way they want to. So that's the approach I'm going to take. I just wanted to check that it did refer to previous answers, and I'm satisfied with that. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was representing farmers in my electorate, and at a time of drought like this, you should show some respect for those representing farmers in their electorate, Mr Speaker.
Members on my
left. What I find most interesting, Mr Speaker, is those—
Minister will just pause for a second. Just stay where you are. That's okay. I'm just going to say to those interjecting loudly to my left, if you don't lower the volume, I'll do it through ejections. I'm putting you all on notice. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What I find most interesting is those opposite come into this place lecturing us about good governance, whilst the stench of corruption emanates from Sussex Street. What complete hypocrisy!
Where are we? The member for Longman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government's stable and certain approach to welfare is helping Australians facing drug and alcohol addiction get back into employment?
The Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Longman, who has come to this place with a passion for helping people facing drug and alcohol addiction, as well as bringing young Australians and people of all ages who are unemployed into employment with the dignity and the certainty and the stability of work and all of the economic security which comes with that. In particular, what we know is in his own electorate, he's been a passionate advocate for the $11 million for the Lives Lived Well drug and alcohol program. That includes $7.5 million for a residential rehabilitation centre and the balance, $3.5 million, for drug detox and treatment programs. And this is immensely important to give people dignity, to give people opportunity and to bring them down from addiction. It's part of a broader program which we're following nationally, a $780 million drug and alcohol program across the nation, including $298 million for the National Ice Action Strategy. And that's involving treatment programs around the country, both at the local level and more generally. One of the things, though, that is very important is that we know that for people seeking employment, where they happen to have and suffer from some form of addiction, it can be a double burden. It can make the seeking of employment especially hard. And that is why the government is proposing to bring into being a 5,000-person trial across 3 sites in Queensland, in New South Wales and in Mandurah in WA for drug testing for welfare recipients. The important thing here is that there are 2 steps initially. Firstly, if somebody fails an initial test, then they will have their welfare quarantine to the extent of 80%, precisely so as to allow them to spend that money on the things that they need to physically sustain themselves, not to be the subject of attacks by drug dealers and others who would harvest their funds. But secondly, if after a second test at 25 days they test positive again, then they will be referred to medical support. And we are providing $10 million to that medical support to allow people the opportunity to have specialised treatment, to give them the chance to break that addiction, to give them the dignity of work which comes more easily if they are free of that addiction. That is real compassion and real stability of policy, because people know we stand for giving Australians the chance to get off addiction. And we do that because we believe in it. We do that because it's the right thing, and we do that because ultimately this is the pathway to stability, to certainty and the dignity of work.
The Minister's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Energy and Emissions Reduction Minister's failure to put the public interest ahead of his own interest, his failure to declare his interest in Jamland to his department, his failure to declare his interest to this House, and his admission that he was representing his own private interests. Will the Prime Minister now do what he should have done weeks ago and sack this minister?
The Prime Minister has the call. Members on my right, the member for Goldstein. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, that would have to be the lamest build-up I've seen to that type of a question in this place before. But, Mr Speaker, not only is every assertion that he's just put to this place totally and absolutely false, Mr Speaker, but the Liberal Party and the National Party will not be lectured by someone who used to work in the New South Wales branch of the Labor Party. He had a desk in the office, Mr Speaker, in the Sussex Street headquarters of a party that stinks with corruption, where they get money in plastic bags and count it out on the table. Mr Speaker, he is a member of the branch of the New South Wales Labor Party, where his colleague in the other place thinks the only thing that— oh, you don't want me to talk about this? You don't want this on the table?
Prime Minister, resume his seats. Members on my right. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. He was State Director of a party that had 10
Leader
people
of the Opposition
resign.
resume his seat. Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. That was not a point of order. The Prime Minister. Member for Gorton. Members on both sides. That was not a point of order, that was a statement. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With a number of Labor Party members from the New South Wales division who used to serve in the Senator Keneally's former government, they're in jail, you could establish a branch at the Silverwater prison of the Labor Party, Mr Speaker, and the member for Watson would know all about it, because one of those people who went to prison was Eddie O'Beid, the ski lodge patron that the member for Watson used to visit when he bends the knees, Mr Speaker, come winter. I will not cop lectures on integrity from the New South Wales Labor Party, Mr Speaker. That mob, Mr Speaker, stinks with corruption as we see it every single day in the Independent Commission Against Corruption, which has your State Secretary right under their gaze.
The members on both sides. The Treasurer. Someone's about to get ejected. Leader of the Opposition seeking to table the document.
No, I'm not, Mr Speaker. I move that...
No, the Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The call alternates, and I'll come back to him after the next question. The member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's stable and certain approach to welfare is helping Australians move out of welfare and into a job through the cashless debit card trials?
The Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question and his ongoing interest and, more importantly, belief in a stable and certain approach to the welfare system. I'm more than happy to respond to the member as the Minister responsible for service delivery, noting Minister Ruston as the policy owner. On this side, can I say we are absolutely committed to the best ways to support individuals, families and communities in places where high levels of welfare dependence coexist with high levels of harm. That's why we've rolled out the cashless debit card to 4 communities across this country that stood up to volunteer to trial the card and stood up for real change in their communities. And the first of these communities was Ceduna and the surrounding regions in the member's own electorate, after calls for help from the community to fix real barriers to employment, the plight of alcohol abuse, for drugs, for domestic violence, for gambling, all things that have been a scourge of those communities. And those communities are now seeing exceptional results that we as a parliament can be proud of. In Ceduna, there is a strong and uniform theme coming out. The streets of their towns are quieter and it feels safer. Call-outs to the night patrols have reduced from several call-outs a night to only 1 or 2 call-outs a fortnight. Police are reporting significant decreases in late-night call-outs for domestic violence, and that's something all of us should welcome here in this place. Health officials and emergency department staff report significant reductions in mental health and domestic violence presentations. Corey McClellan, an Indigenous leader from the community of Kunibba near Ceduna, has said, "This is the best thing that has happened to our community. We'd do it again, absolutely." Over a dozen research projects attest to the trial's success. Most recently, the baseline report in the Goldfields has reaffirmed the previous findings that we're seeing. A decrease in drug and alcohol issues, decrease in violent crime and antisocial behaviour, improvements in child health and well-being, improved financial management, ongoing and even strengthened community support. And this is completely consistent with the independent evaluation released in 2017 that found that the cashless debit card has a considerable positive impact in the first 2 trial sites. It includes 41% of participants reported drinking less frequently, 41%. 48% of participants surveyed reporting drugs less frequently, and 48% of those who gambled before the trial now reporting gambling less often. Doing nothing is not an option, And combined with the investment in social services, we're seeing a real investment in helping people.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I move that so much of the standing orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion immediately. That the House, 1, notes that A, the only compliance investigation by the Department of Environment and Energy into alleged poisoning of critically endangered grasslands in the Monaro region relates to the land owned by Jamland Proprietary Limited, which is in itself part owned by the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. B, the Minister met with the Department of Environment and Energy and the Office of the then Minister for the Environment and Energy, and now Treasurer, to discuss the listing of critically endangered grasslands while the department was investigating the alleged poisoning of the very same grasslands on land owned by Jamland. C, an FOI and an answer to a question on notice from the Department on Environment and Energy confirms the Minister has failed to declare his interest in Jamland to the department. D, the Minister has failed to declare his interest in Jamland to the House as required by the ministerial standards and resolutions and standing orders of the House. E, the Minister has repeatedly told the House he was representing the interests of farmers in his electorate, but the Minister has admitted on ABC Radio Illawarra that he's been representing his own private interests, again in breach of the ministerial standards. And 2, censures the Prime Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction for repeatedly breaching the ministerial standards by A, failing to appropriately declare his personal and pecuniary interests, B, using his ministerial office to advance his private interests at the expense of the public interests, and C, deliberately misleading the House, and 3, therefore calls on the Minister to resign, and if he will not, calls on the Prime Minister to immediately sack the Minister. Mr Speaker, the case against the Minister is clear. He
Leader of the
used his
Opposition
public
will
office
resume
to
his seat.
advance
The Leader of the House.
Yes, Mr Speaker, I move that the member no longer be heard.
The Leader of the House has moved that the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. If the ayes have it, division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Lock the doors. Order. The question is the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Gray and Nichols tell us for the ayes, and the honourable members for Werriwa and Lawler tell us for the noes. The members must remain seated during the division. Order. The result of the division is ayes 75, noes 70. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. Is the motion seconded? The Manager of Opposition Business.
Seconded. There's one threatened species in Parliament House today, and he's sitting right over there.
The Manager of Opposition Business resume his seat. The Leader of the House.
He's right there.
The Leader of the House.
I move that the member be no longer heard.
The Leader of the House has moved the Manager of Opposition Business be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. If the ayes have it, division required. We'll ring the bells for 1 minute. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. Members must remain in their seats unless they're leaving the chamber or did not vote in the previous division, or they are changing their vote, in which case they must report to the tellers. Lock the doors. Question is the Manager of Opposition Business be no further heard. Members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or they did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers.
There is a plague of them. There is a plague. Endemic.
Order. The result of the division is ayes 75, no 70. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to. I call the member for Griffith.
Speaker, this is an important matter, particularly given Threatened Species Day. The earless dragon
The member for
is one
Griffith
of many.
will resume her seat. The Leader of the House.
I move that the member no longer be heard.
The Leader of the House has moved that the member for Griffith be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. I put the same tellers as the previous division. Members must remain in their seats unless they're leaving the chamber or did not vote in the previous division, or they're changing their votes, in which case they must report to the tellers. Lock the doors. The question is the member for Griffith be no further heard. Members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their votes or did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 75, no 70. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to, and I call the member for Hindmarsh.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, this Prime Minister has chosen a witless minister over the earless dragon.
Hindmarsh will resume his seat. The Leader of the House.
They should try and fully embrace Aldi and go for good different. I move that the member no longer be heard.
Question is the member for Hindmarsh be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. No, they did. I think the ayes have it. Division required. I'll ring the bells for 1 minute. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. Members must remain in their seats unless they're leaving the chamber or did not vote in the previous division, or they're changing their vote, in which case they must report to the tellers.
Yeah, I'll let you drive it.
That's not going
We had a pause 10 seconds, you were gone.
Lock the doors. Order. The question is the member for Hindmarsh be no further heard. Members must remain in their seat unless they're changing their vote or did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 75, noes 70. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to. I call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition resume his seat. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I move that the motion be put.
The question is that the motion be put. All those of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Ring the bells for one. Division required. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute, but the tellers will do a full count. You know, I will appoint the same tellers as the previous division, and again, members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Lock the doors. The question is that the motion be put. Members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 74, noes 70. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. I think the noes have it. Division required. We'll ring the bells for 1 minute and the tellers will do a full count this time. Lock the doors. Question is that the motion moved by the Leader of the House be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Werriwa and Lawler tellers for the ayes, the honourable members for Nichols and Gray tellers for the noes. Of the division is ayes 68, noes 75. The question is therefore negatived. Members can resume their seats so that we can proceed with business. The member for Stirling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government is delivering stability and certainty through a strong and consistent policy on border protection?
The Minister for Home Affairs has the call.
I thank the honourable member for his question, Mr Speaker. Well, this government certainly is very proud of the fact that we've been able to stop deaths at sea, we've been able to get children out of detention that Labor put into detention, and we have a very stable and certain policy offering when it comes to national security and border protection. But, Mr Speaker, as it turns out, that's not the case on the Labor side of this parliament. Now, I'm not often found in this place quoting James Campbell, but there was an interesting article that he published on September the 4th, and it went something like this. I'll just read and quote part of it, Mr Speaker, because it's content-rich, and maybe we'll come back to it again, but in the time-limited offering we have today, it says Christina Keneally thinks she's on a winner by attacking border protection policies, but political history dictates that she is so wrong. Let's hear it for Shane Newman, he says, a man whose political judgment looks better every day that passes.
The minister will just.
I'm quoting from this article.
No. Minister, just listen to the problem I have with the question, or his answer, I should say. And whilst he's given many answers like this, they've been to questions that have had the tagline, "Are there any alternative policies?" And that question did not ask that, and so at the moment he is out of order. Members on my left, and I just say to the minister, The question was about the government's policy of delivering stability and certainty. It did not mention any alternative policies.
And go to the stability and certainty of what this government promises. I'll contrast it to what we won't do, Mr. Speaker. And it's important.
No, the minister won't do that.
Important. We will not follow Labor's lead.
No, the minister.
And I use their example
the minister
by
will
pointing out
resume his seat. The minister resume his seat. The member for Hindmarsh will resume his seat. I've made this clear on a number of occasions. There's been numerous questions asked, hundreds of questions asked, that have asked about alternative policies. It's not up to me to modify the questions. The minister will not go to alternative policies because he was not asked about it. If he wants to be asked about alternative policies in a different question, he can. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very important advice, and I'm very happy to return to this topic tomorrow, the day after, many days after that, Mr. Speaker, because at the election the Australian public voted for this government because we keep our borders secure. And, Mr. Speaker, we keep our promises with the Australian public. We aren't all over the place, Mr. Speaker, on border protection and national security. We have delivered strong border security, and we will not allow a return to days. We will never adopt a policy, Mr. Speaker, that allows people to drown at sea. We will never adopt a policy that sees children back in detention. And, Mr. Speaker, this government will not adopt a policy where we allow the people smugglers to get back in control. And, Mr. Speaker, at the last election, when the Australian public looked at this government, they saw something which they believed was an essential ingredient in leadership demonstrated by the Prime Minister. That is, that we will bring people into this country the right way, but we will not allow people to hop on boats and come to our country. We've been very clear about it. We can be compassionate because we will bring this year 18,750 people into our country under the humanitarian and refugee program, but we will not allow them to come by boat, Mr. Speaker. We won't allow them to come by boat, and we will not allow, Mr. Speaker, a situation again where this country loses control of its borders.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice.